Hi everyone, and welcome back to Be Ready to Apologize. Firstly, let me apologize. It has been 2 weeks since I last made a video, and let me just explain that it's not because I didn't want to make another video in our series on atheism. It's just that I have a serious health challenge that often prevents me from making videos. So even today, I'm not feeling at my best, but I just felt that I need to make the effort to make another video. So here's the next lesson in our series, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to combine lesson 3 and lesson 4 together. I thought lesson 3 would be a longer module, but it turns out that there's very little to cover there, and therefore I decided to combine lesson 3 and lesson 4 together into one study. There's a lot of information that we're going to cover in this module. A lot of slides, a lot of quotes. So please bear with me, be patient. But I think you will appreciate that when we get to the end of the study, you'll see why we had so many slides and stuff, because I want to make sure that the information I give you is not my own opinion, and I want to make sure that the information that I give you is coming from the original sources, so that you can have a real, proper, and accurate understanding of the material that I present to you. In this module, we're going to answer the question, what is secularism? And in addition to that, we're also I'm going to combine that with the module, the war on Christianity. And you will see when I finish how the two modules, the two lessons essentially go together. Even lesson 5 is a continuation of lesson 3 and 4. And so you will see how everything ties together. So let's get started with our lesson today by answering the question, what is secularism? So, what is secularism? According to the National Secular Society, secularism is a principle that involves two basic propositions. The first is the strict separation of the state from religious institutions. And the second is that people of different religions and beliefs are equal before the law. So essentially, what secularism is they want a religious neutral society. So they don't, and also they want a society where government and religious expression are two complete separate entities, essentially running on parallel lines, that they will never have any interchange with each other. The core tenets of secularism are this. According again to the National Secular Society, the separation of religion and state is the foundation of secularism. It ensures that religious groups don't interfere in the affairs of state. It makes sure that the state also does not interfere in religious affairs. Secularism seeks to ensure and protect freedom of religion, beliefs, and practices for all citizens. So basically, again, they say that their goal is to protect the freedom of religion. That therefore one religious belief should not be favored more than another religious belief. Secularism is not about curtailing religious freedom. It's about ensuring that freedoms of thought and conscience apply equally to all believers and non-believers. Secularists do not advocate for the abolition of God and religion like atheists or humanists do in their charters. And we looked at the Humanist Manifesto, and we could see that they are trying to replace all religion with their new humanist doctrine. And atheists, for the most part, are against all religion because all religion points to the existence of God, which obviously they are against. Secularists believe that the church and state should be mutually exclusive entities. As I said, they believe that church and state should be two completely separate entities having absolutely no interaction with each other. And then secularists, again, are big advocates of democracy. They, like humanists, believe that man should decide his fate and not God, even though they acknowledge God's existence. So secularists are not against the idea of God. What they are against is God having any influence on government, on how we manage our society. So they believe that religion should be a personal thing. It shouldn't be a societal thing. So basically, God has his place, but as long as he's, as long as we're free to make our own decisions, then we're quite happy for you to believe in God if you choose to do so or choose not to do so. Now we're going to move on to the war against Christianity. And under that, we're going to start with the truth about the separation of church and state. There's, everybody has heard about this First Amendment that, the government shall, and I will just quote it because according to the foundation, the foundational belief of secularism is the First Amendment. So let me just quote what that states. And it says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Secularists have taken this to mean that government should not have any interaction with the church, and that the church should not have any interaction with the government. As a result of this misinterpretation of the First Amendment, and we'll get into that in a few moments, but as a result of this misinterpretation of the First Amendment, there have been a lot of bad things that have happened. And let me just, before we get into that, let me just explain how this whole misunderstanding came about. Jefferson wrote a letter to a group of Baptists in Connecticut on January 1st, 1802. And these Baptists were concerned about the government interference in the affairs of the church. And they wrote to Jefferson, who obviously was one of the framers of the Constitution, and said that, what guarantees do we have that the government would not have an undue influence in how we operate in this newly formed nation? So they were looking for some guarantees that the very things that happened, that they were fleeing from in Europe, where the Catholic Church had grown in such influence that it now essentially had control over kings and queens and prime ministers and stuff, and was now persecuting Christians who refused, to bow to the authority of the Catholic Church, which is why, we had the whole nation of America was founded, as a safe haven for people who wanted religious freedom and liberty to start again and form a free, fair, and just society where they could have freedom of conscience and speech and religion. So here is what Jefferson wrote in his letter. He said, "Believing with you that religion is a matter which lies solely between man and his God, that he owes account to none other for his faith or his worship, that the legislative power of government reach actions only and not opinions. I contemplate with sovereign reverence that act of the whole American people which declared that their legislature should make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, thus building a wall of separation between church and state." The same Thomas Jefferson wrote, "I consider the government of the US as interdicted by the Constitution from intermeddling with religious institutions, their doctrines, disciplines, or exercises." By reading these two letters, it would appear that Thomas Jefferson is stating that the government should essentially have nothing to do with the church. Even if that was so, he is not saying in his letter that the church should not be able to exercise its First Amendment rights to have a say with regards to how the laws and policies of the government should be should be put together or adopted. So what Thomas Jefferson is essentially saying is that the separation of church and state should be one way. The government should be prevented from having an influence on the church, but he did not say that the church should be prevented from having an influence on the government. This is because the First Amendment, under the First Amendment, the church is just like any other entity. It has the same freedom of speech as any other entity, like a corporation or like an individual. So therefore, if individuals who make up the church, just like individuals who make up a corporation, have the right to speak out in favor of a government law or policy, or to speak against a particular government law or policy, then the church should also have that same right. Here is the problem, though, and that is that because of this separation of church and because of this separation of church and state, the church has essentially been neutralized, and therefore the church no longer is able to speak. And because of that, now the government has been able to pass laws that directly impact the doctrines and practices of the church. Under this current COVID-19 climate that we find ourselves, we see that the government now has not only prevented the church from speaking out against policies like abortion, like abortion, or policies like immigration, and or policies like the public what should be taught in our public schools. But now the governments are now literally dictating that when church services can be held. In California right now, it is illegal for church services, for churches to gather for worship, and they're saying that this is because of they're exercising emergency powers emergency powers in order to keep people safe. But at the same time, they're allowing abortion clinics to operate without any such restrictions. They're allowing marijuana stores to operate with no such restrictions. They're allowing liquor stores to operate with no such restrictions. And we've all seen the violent riots that have been going on in various cities across the country for the past 3 months, and nothing has been said by the government to really condemn these riots. Yes, they did start out as peaceful protests, let's be fair, but peaceful protests inevitably, especially when they're protesting against against something, and when it's a racial issue, in the case of George Floyd, and they were now making accusations against the government and demanding justice and saying that a justice, and now decided that the police are the enemy. Such protests quickly turn violent, and that is essentially what we've seen. But as a result of the government of these states, the governors of many of these states have said that is okay to protest, that they're exercising their freedom of speech. These are peaceful protests. They're exercising their First Amendment right. But at the same time, they're also saying, well, churches can't gather because they're risking the spread of the virus. So therefore, the First Amendment rights are given to one group, and the same First Amendment rights are being taken away from another group. And this is not how the Constitution was written. This is not how the First Amendment is meant to be carried out. It's meant to be for everyone. There's also what they call an equal protection clause, meaning to say that you would not treat one person, one group or persons, better than the other. That we're all equal under the law. However, government has said, and here's one way in which the government has neutralized the church. Lyndon Baines Johnson, who at the time was a Democratic senator, came up with this idea. He petitioned the Senate to write this bill that would essentially make churches a 501(c)(3) charitable organization, meaning to say that if they became this kind a 501(c)(3) charitable organization, they'll be exempt from paying any taxes on any of the offerings that they received. Now, this was a law that eventually was passed in 1954. I said, while Lyndon Baines Johnson was before he became President Johnson, was still in the U.S. Senate. Now, here's what a 501(c) organization is. This to give you the law and what the actual law says governing 501(c) organization. It says, it is a portion of the U.S. Internal Revenue Code and a specific tax category for non-profit organizations that meet the requirements of Section 501(c)(3) are exempt from federal income tax. While the Internal Revenue Service recognizes more than 30 types of non-profit organizations that qualify as 501(c)(3) organizations are unique because donations to these organizations are tax deductible for donors. Kershaw, in his book entitled In Caesar's Grip, said, for a 501(c)(3) church to openly speak out or organize in opposition to anything that the government declares legal, even if it is immoral, for example, abortion, homosexuality, or same-sex marriage, etc., that church will jeopardize its tax-exempt status. The 501(c)(3) has had a chilling effect upon the free speech rights of the church. Lyndon Baines Johnson was a shrewd and cunning politician who seemed to well appreciate how easily many of the clergy would sell out. Lyndon Baines Johnson was able to get the church to agree to this new designation as a 501c3 charitable or tax-exempt organization because he was relying on the fact that the clergy of that day were greedy. They were more concerned with keeping money that they would have ordinarily had to pay in taxes and thus retaining their free speech rights rather than keeping that money and having more funds, to do with as they so pleased. And if we fast forward, to today, we see that that was a horrible decision that the church agreed to, and it should have fought back then to retain its free speech rights. Here are some major court decisions that have been made as a result of this misinterpretation of the First Amendment. In Engels versus Vitale, the Supreme Court ruled in 1962 that school prayer was no longer allowed. And the argument was that that school prayer was a violation of the separation clause of the First Amendment. That same year, the Supreme Court also ruled that in Roe versus Wade, and made another landmark decision to legalize abortion in the United States. This decision is now responsible for the death of more than 50 million babies. 1 million babies, on average, have been aborted each year since this decision has been made. Not only that, this misinterpretation of the First Amendment that stripped schools of the right, stripped public school students of their rights to gather to pray. It also ordered that schools take down plaques of the Ten Commandments, because most schools, had a plaque of the Ten Commandments clearly displayed in their hallway, to remind children that we are a nation under God, and therefore the school as an institution was also an institution under God. But this landmark ruling of Engels versus Vitale essentially removed that right and said that no, that the government and church should be two separate entities, and having prayer in school or having the Ten Commandments clearly displayed in the school was a violation of the separation clause. Here are some other horrible consequences that America has since had to deal with as a result of these two horrible decisions. Since 1962, teen suicide and young suicide rates have increased. Since 1962, the divorce rate and the number of single-parent families and couples living together has also increased. There's also been an increase in adultery and an increase in adultery. Since 1962, teen pregnancy has also increased, and we have the teen dropout rate also went up immediately that prayer and the Ten Commandments were taken out of school. Disciplinary teen dropout rates, juvenile delinquency rates went up. I mean, it just created a huge problem in our public school system that we're still suffering from today. And of course, since 1962, there's also been a steady rise in and a very dramatic rise in violent crime. Now that we have seen how the concept of the separation of church and state has been applied in our secular courts, let us see if the person who they claim is responsible for the separation of church and state being put in the Constitution. Let's see what his opinion was. Was he really in favor of a complete separation of church and state? And of course, I'm referring to Thomas Jefferson. And in his second inaugural address, Jefferson stated, "In matters of religion, I have considered that its free exercise is placed by the Constitution independent of the powers of the general government. I have therefore undertaken on no occasion to prescribe the religious exercises suited to it, but have left them as the Constitution found them, under the direction and discipline of the Church or state authorities acknowledged by the several religious societies." Also, while Jefferson was president of the school board, so before becoming president, he was also former president of the school board in the District of Columbia. And in 1804, he said Bible reading and the use of the Bible as a textbook was the policy. The Bible was a textbook that was to be used in the public school system in the District of Columbia. Part of the curriculum plan that he designed for the University of Virginia was moral instruction, including the proof of the being of God, the Creator, in the public schools to be taught by teachers. So he was in favor of creation being taught in schools, whereas now pretty much all schools, unless it is a private school, and especially if it's a Christian school, those are the only schools that today teach creation. All the public schools teach evolution, as teach evolution, because they say that the teaching creation is a violation of the separation clause of the Constitution, which we can see now really was not the intent of Thomas Jefferson. Religious instruction, as far as he was concerned, was to be on an equal footing with secular instruction. And this is what Thomas Jefferson, this was his policy when he was the rector of the University of Virginia. He believed that religious and secular instruction should be given equal weight, and that one should not be sacrificed in favor of the other. Jefferson also approved of setting aside a chapel for religious worship and proposed to encourage various denominations to situate their theological schools near the university, thus enabling the students of the university to attend religious exercise. Also, concerning our nation, Jefferson said, God who gave us life gave us liberty, and can the liberties of a nation be thought secure when we have removed their firm basis, a conviction in the minds of the people that their liberties are a gift from God, that they are not to violate, but with his wrath. Indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, that his justice cannot sleep forever. Yes, we did produce a near perfect republic, but will they keep it? Or will they, in the enjoyment of plenty, lose the memory of freedom? Material abundance without character is the surest way to destruction. Jefferson further said, I shall needs to the favor of the being in whose hands we are, who led our fathers, as Israel of old, from their native land, and planted them in a country flowing with all the necessaries and comforts of life, who has covered our infancy with his providence and our riper years with his wisdom and power, and to whose goodness I ask you to join in supplications with me that he will so enlighten the minds of our servants, guide their counsels, and prosper their measures, that whatsoever they do shall result in your good, and shall secure to you the peace, friendship, and approbation of all nations. So clearly, Jefferson's concept of the separation of church and state was misunderstood. He was not saying that the church should have no say in government, but what he was saying is the government should not interfere in the religious practices of the church. The government should not dictate the doctrines, the beliefs, the exercises to the traditions of the church. But like I said, the Constitution gives the freedom of speech to all people, and the church is made up of people. Therefore, therefore, the church has every right to speak out. If the church feels that the government is passing a law that violates the laws of God, then it is the right of the church under the Constitution, and that is what he was advocating. So when he spoke to those bishops in Connecticut in his letter in 1802, he was reassuring them that the government would not dictate how they should operate their churches. But he never said that the churches should not be able to exercise their influence on society, and that they should not be able to speak out against an immoral law that the government may choose to pass, or a policy that the church believed would be harmful to society. The church is the moral conscience of the nation, and that is how Jefferson viewed the church. But today we have secularists such as the secularist foundations, politicians, lawyers, and things that are fighting, hard to essentially silence the influence that the church has on society. Groups like the ACLU, the Freedom from Religious Foundation, the Alliance for the Separation of Church and State, and all of and other individuals and institutions that have dedicated themselves to essentially muzzle the church and prevent the church from having any influence on society. The director of the Center for Christian Statesmanship says that the men who constructed the Constitution, that they were not secularists. They had a belief in God. Some of them were Christians, but many of them were deists. The people who put the Constitution together were not atheists. They understood the importance of God in society, the importance of God having dominion over the affairs of men. Dr. Frank Wright says quite the contrary. Most were devout Christians who applied their Christian faith to everyday life, including the government. He says that President Thomas Jefferson is a good example. He notes that at the same time Jefferson served as president, that he was the chairman of the DC public school system and mandated in 1804 that 2 books be taught in public school, one being the Bible and the second being the Watts hymnal. So again, he was saying that Jefferson was not against religious instruction. He felt that religious instruction was so important that he insisted that it be taught in our public schools. He also insisted that it was taught in universities. That when he was chairman of the public school system, when he was the rector of the University of Virginia, he promoted the teaching of the Bible. He promoted the teaching of creation. Evolution was not something that was taught in the public school system, back in Jefferson's day. Wright calls that an extraordinary thing to do for someone who believes in the separation of church and state. If he truly believed in it in the way in which it is interpreted today, then why would he insist on doing these things? Jefferson's background shows that he had a deep respect for God and saw the value of religious instruction, and did not want American children, or the American society, to grow up, to be established on atheism or on secularism. He realized that a nation that believes in God and worships God and fears and obeys God's laws is a nation that's going to be strong and strong and prosperous. Wright believes anti-gospel forces like the American Civil Liberties Union have twisted the working of the Establishment Clause and developed their own false interpretation about separation of church and state, which he says the founding fathers never intended. Again, this was something that was later developed by secularists, by humanists, by atheists, because they wanted to push the church out, because they realized that in order for them to pass the laws that they wanted to pass that would give the government more and more power and more influence over society, the church stood in opposition to that, because people were very religious in those days, and they received religious instruction, and that religious instruction informed the way in which they voted. And therefore, many things that greedy politicians or power-hungry politicians wanted to do, many of those things could not be done, because the people continually voted against those things. The people continually opposed those things on religious grounds. And that's why Lyndon Baines Johnson in 1954 came up with the idea to classify the church as a 501c3 tax-exempt organization, to put a muzzle on the church. And unfortunately, the church accepted this deal and gave up its most cherished right, and that was its right to free speech, which now the church is still no longer free to exercise. It should be noted, that secularism has its roots in the progressive movement that took place at the turn of the 20th century. If you have followed politics, you'll know that most Democrats now call themselves progressives. They no longer call themselves liberals. Now they call themselves progressives, because the idea is they're always wanting change. They're always saying we have to change society. So each they're always pushing toward. But what are they progressing to? They're not progressing towards a closer relationship with God. They're not progressing towards a more pure and God-fearing and just society. No, they're moving closer and closer towards a more permissive society, a society that has essentially pushed God out of the way and said, we want to make our own laws, and we don't want to have we don't want to be responsible to any external power. In 2008, we know that the progressives won the White House with their first really progressive candidate, and in November of this year, they're seeking to take the White House again with an even more progressive candidate. So progressivism is essentially the same as is the same as the ultimate secularism, or secularism, in that they have the goal to completely silence the church and essentially cut church out from society, and essentially completely muzzle the church so that it has no influence in society any longer. They believe that it's the job of the state to shape society, and that the church is to work with the government to achieve its goals, whereas the role of the church is to be the moral compass of the society. So now let me just talk about the goals of secularism. The goals of secularism are the desire to remove corruption and undue influence from government through the taming of bosses and political machines, the efforts to include more people more directly in the political process, the conviction that government must play a role to solve social problems and establish fairness in economic matters. It should be noted that some people are called secular humanists. Like the humanists, the progressives' goal is to create a completely godless society by taking over all the institutions of learning, especially the public school system and the universities. Charles F. Potter, a co-signer of the Humanist Manifesto, said in a 1930 book, Humanism, a New Religion, said, "Education is thus a most powerful ally of humanism, and every public school is a school of humanism." Then he asked a very provocative rhetorical question. He said, "What can theistic Sunday school meeting for an hour once a week and teaching only a fraction of the children do to stem the tide of a 5-day program of humanistic teaching?" So what he was basically saying is that what can Sunday school, a 1-hour Sunday school class, what kind of influence could that have compared to the influence that a 5-day school week have on the mind of a child? So you can see that the public school system is being used to teach our children this new humanistic religion, and that's why evolution is such a big part of the public school system and essentially the universities. Universities. The term secular humanism was first known to have been used in the 1930s during the heights of the progressive era. In 1943, the then Archbishop of Canterbury, William Temple, warned that the Christian tradition was in danger of being undermined by a secular humanism which hoped to retain Christian values without Christian faith. So what he was saying is that this new religion So humanism has no problem with the moral values that religion teaches. As I said earlier, that they thought that yes, religion has played its role and has brought us to this point. But then in 1930, the humanists suddenly decided, okay, religion is now obsolete, and we need to replace it with a new religion, and that religion was humanism, and which led them to write the humanist manifesto, of which of which Potter was and Dewey were co-signers. Now, John Dewey, as I said, who was one of the chief co-signers of this humanist manifesto in 1933, and is also known as the father of modern education, because it was Dewey that came up with that petitioned the government and essentially came up with the plan for the government to take over the public school system. And thus he realized that if in order for this new religion to grow, that it would have to be taught to the next generation, and the best way to get this new religion adopted in society was through the public school system. So this is why Dewey worked so hard, to petition, the government to essentially establish, a public school system, which then led to each of the states taking over their respective public education systems. And essentially, before that, it was the church that had the greatest influence over the public schools. Schools were centers of religious instruction as well as secular instruction, as we saw earlier with Thomas Jefferson, saying that secular and religious instruction should both be equally taught in our public schools and universities. But Dewey, said that you can't make socialists out of individuals. Children who know how to think for themselves spoil the harmony of the collective society which is coming, where everyone is interdependent. So he was saying that children should not be allowed to think for themselves, that they should be told what to think, so that way they can be programmed to act in a certain way. And look where our society is today. On a final note, it should be pointed out that as noted earlier, that the founding fathers were not secularists. They were not humanists. They were not they were not atheists. I said many of them, the majority of them were deists, and then there was a number of them that were Christians. They valued the belief in the God of creation, and that is why it is in the founding documents. That man has been endowed by his creator with these inalienable rights. The name creator was put in the Bill of Rights to say that our rights do not come from the government, but our rights come from our creator, and that they are inalienable rights, meaning to say that these are not rights that can be taken away from us by any government entity. But that is not what we have today. As a result of this separation of church, misinterpretation of the separation of church and state, the government has essentially become God over this nation, and it's the government that gives us our rights. And the issue then becomes the government. A government that gives you rights is the same government that has the power to take those rights away, and that is what we're seeing today. That our religious freedoms are slowly, being taken away from us. If we look what's happening in the current climate with COVID-19, The government now is clamping down on churches, saying that churches cannot gather for religious worship, that more than 10 persons cannot gather together in a group, which essentially means that churches cannot gather for religious worship. They're saying that if they do gather, they can't sing because singing might cause the spread of the virus. So essentially, now we have churches that are being muzzled. The very thing that Lyndon Baines Johnson, was hoping to do is beyond his wildest dream come true. That the church is now, in the grip of the government. As we read in Frank's book, in Caesar's grip, that the church is in the government's hands. And it was never the goal or the intent of the founders to create a legal framework or for the future creation of a secular society. That was, even if the American people wanted one, that was not the goal of the founding fathers. Their goal was to create a society that was free to worship or not to worship as they pleased. That was the society that they created. But that is a society now that we are fast losing. And if we're not careful, we will be completely taken away from us. In his farewell address to the nation of the newly formed nation of the United States on September 19th, 1796, George Washington declared, it is impossible to govern the world without God and the Bible. Of all the dispositions and habits that lead to political prosperity, our religion and morality are the indispensable supporters. Let us, with caution, indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. Reason and experience both forbid us to expect that our national morality can prevail in exclusion of religious principle. And I will just end there in saying that George Washington, the first president of this country, made it clear that we cannot be a moral country. We cannot hope to have a nation with a strong moral foundation unless that strong moral foundation is built upon God. Well, that's all I have for you in this study. I hope you found it informative. I want to thank you for your patience. Yes, it was a long study and there's a lot of information that I gave you, but I would really appeal to you to watch this video through maybe another time and just really take notes and understand where our country was and how we have gotten to the place where we have gotten to today, because now we're at a place where the church needs to rise up and fight for its rights that were taken away from it. We need to fight for our rights. We need to once again declare our independence from a tyrannical government. Again, thank you, for joining me today. Next week, next time, because I don't want to promise when, but in our next lesson, we will cover this topic, the rationale behind atheism, humanism, and secularism. So I'm going to just tie all three of these philosophies together and show you how ultimately they all are they're all pushing for the same goal. So please hit the subscribe button, and also please click the notification bell so that you will be notified when I post my next lesson. Again, I really appreciate you joining me. I would also ask you, please leave comments down below. Let me know what you liked or what you disliked about this study or any of the studies that I have presented. I would like you guys to hold me accountable, and let's have a dialogue. But everything that I'm seeking to present to you through through this channel, I really want it to be stuff that you can take and learn and then act upon the information. Don't just hear everything that I'm saying. Hear it with the goal of acting upon this information. Again, thank you so much for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you again next time.